Eschatology is the study of ultimate destinies, including judgment, resurrection, restoration, and cosmic transformation.
Right. And in this deep dive, we compare various eschatological frameworks to the mainstream scholarly reading to show you how each framework reads the texts.
And to show how closely that matches mainstream academic method, rather than evaluating which belief is true.
We're going to begin topic 1 immediately, which is prophecy.
The mainstream scholarly reading is that prophecy constitutes ancient crisis literature directed at ancient communities. The literary function of prophecy was to offer judgment, vindication, and restoration hope to audiences facing immediate ancient pressures.
So let's compare the views for you, moving from more aligned to more distant regarding prophecy.
Yeah, starting with preterist-adjacent or context-first readings, I should define this for you. It emphasizes the first century context, 70 CE, the temple destruction, the Roman setting, and the author and audience horizon, without automatically being a finished doctrinal system. This view keeps the focus of prophecy firmly on the ancient horizon.
Then there's partial preterism, which stays close to the first century context regarding ancient crises, but then starts building a larger theological system across texts.
And full preterism keeps the action in the ancient world, then reads major categories across writings as one unified ancient interpretation. Moving down, idealism keeps the symbolic language of prophecy, but treats it as a recurring theological drama, removing the concrete historical anchor.
While amillennialism keeps a symbolic approach to prophetic kingdom language, but builds a synthesis heavily shaped by late antique and Augustinian development.
Then historic premillennialism reads prophecy through a harmonized premillennial scheme that steps outside the original horizon.
And postmillennialism turns prophecy into a theological synthesis of kingdom expansion and social transformation across history.
Progressive dispensationalism softens older divisions, but still repurposes ancient prophecy for a distant timeline. Dispensational premillennialism repurposes ancient crisis literature into a highly charted, distant timeline sequence built on sharp modern distinctions unknown to the original text.
Historicism and Adventist historicism repurpose prophecy into a sequential, transhistorical map of post-biblical church and world history.
And finally, restorationist and high control systems repurpose prophecy into an exclusive identity marker for their specific modern timeline.
So the takeaway is that prophecy is anchored by scholarship in ancient history, whereas views moving down the scale increasingly convert it into theological architecture or distant timelines.
Which brings us to topic 2, 70 CE and the temple destruction. The mainstream scholarly reading is that the destruction of the temple is a central focal point for interpreting much of the New Testament.
Right, and this is because the loss of the temple fundamentally altered Second Temple Judaism and the world of the text.
The historical anchor is the Roman-Jewish War and the destruction of the temple in 70 CE.
Comparing the views from more aligned to more distant regarding 70 CE, preterist-adjacent or context-first readings keep the temple's fall as the primary reference point for ancient texts.
And partial preterism stays close to this first century context, applying the temple destruction to a large portion of the text, then starts building a larger theological system for remaining categories.
Full preterism keeps the action in the ancient world around 70 CE, then reads major categories across writings as one unified ancient interpretation. Idealism keeps the event, but treats the fall of Jerusalem as merely one symbolic instance of a recurring theological pattern.
While amillennialism recognizes the event historically, but shifts the primary focus to the ongoing church age.
Historic premillennialism treats 70 CE as historical, but looks to a distinct premillennial reign for ultimate resolution. Postmillennialism incorporates 70 CE as a past milestone within a longer trajectory of theological triumph.
Progressive dispensationalism acknowledges the first century event while maintaining a delayed structure for a distant timeline.
And dispensational premillennialism treats the 70 CE destruction as merely preliminary, repurposing temple language for a distant timeline.
Historicism and Adventist historicism distribute the significance of such events across later centuries of church history.
And restorationist and high control systems minimize the ancient anchor, repurposing destruction language to validate their modern community boundaries.
So the takeaway here is that scholarship sees 70 CE as climactic for the ancient communities, whereas distant systems treat it as a minor prelude to their own timelines.
Moving right into topic 3, apocalyptic symbolism. The mainstream scholarly reading is that apocalyptic symbolism is historically coded, complex literary rhetoric.
Right, and this is because ancient authors used the genre to critique empires and communicate realities safely.
The literary function is to interpret suffering and Roman imperial pressure through cosmic imagery.
Comparing the views from more aligned to more distant regarding apocalyptic symbolism, Preterist-adjacent or context-first readings keep the symbolism tied strictly to the ancient crisis and Roman setting.
Yeah, and partial preterism stays close to the first century context, reading symbols through ancient events, then starts building a larger theological system across texts.
Full preterism keeps the symbolic action in the ancient world, then reads major categories across writings as one unified ancient interpretation. Idealism keeps the imagery but strips away the historical anchor, emphasizing purely spiritual motifs.
And amillennialism keeps a non-literal approach to symbols, but binds them to medieval theological frameworks.
Historic premillennialism reads symbols through a more literalized lens to support a physical reign.
Postmillennialism interprets symbols to map the gradual historical success of the Church.
Progressive dispensationalism allows some initial historical meaning, but heavily repurposes symbols for a distant timeline.
While dispensational premillennialism repurposes apocalyptic symbolism into a literalized, decoded blueprint for a distant timeline.
Historicism and Adventist historicism repurpose symbols as direct representations of European history and papal succession.
And restorationist and high control systems repurpose ancient symbols into exclusive markers of modern institutional conflicts.
So the clear takeaway is that scholarship treats apocalyptic symbolism as coded ancient crisis literature, while distant systems convert it into modern literal blueprints or transhistorical codes.
Topic 4 is Revelation. The mainstream scholarly reading is that Revelation is an ancient text responding to Roman imperial ideology.
Yeah, and this is because the book utilizes scriptural reuse and Second Temple Jewish thought to address specific communities.
The historical anchor is the 7 churches in Asia Minor facing Roman imperial pressure.
Comparing the views from more aligned to more distant regarding Revelation, preterist-adjacent or context-first readings keep Revelation focused on the Roman setting and the 7 churches.
Partial preterism stays close to the first century context of the book, then starts building a larger theological system across texts.
Full preterism keeps the action in the ancient world, then reads major categories across the entire book as one unified ancient interpretation. Idealism keeps the visionary nature of Revelation, but removes the concrete Roman anchor, seeing an enduring theological drama.
While amillennialism keeps a symbolic reading of the text, but layers it with ecclesiastic traditions.
Historic premillennialism reads Revelation as a chronological guide, culminating in a literal reign.
Postmillennialism uses the book's latter imagery to synthesize a vision of historical triumph.
Progressive dispensationalism attempts to bridge initial historical relevance with a distant timeline sequence.
And dispensational premillennialism repurposes the text entirely, severing it from the 7 churches to serve as a distant timeline manual.
Historicism and Adventist historicism repurpose Revelation into a continuous map of world history spanning millennia.
And restorationist and high control systems repurpose the text into a rigid chronology, authenticating their modern existence.
The takeaway for you is that scholarship grounds Revelation in its Roman imperial context, whereas distant frameworks relocate its meaning to later eras.
On to topic 5, Jesus' urgent sayings. The mainstream scholarly reading is that many scholars locate these sayings within the proclamation of imminent vindication.
And this is because the texts reflect an urgent, crisis-laden Jewish restoration movement.
The literary function is to warn the original audience and announce divine rule.
So comparing the views from more aligned to more distant regarding Jesus' urgent sayings, preterist-adjacent or context-first readings keep the urgent language tied to the immediate horizon of the author and audience.
Partial preterism stays close to the first century context of these warnings, then starts building a larger theological system across texts.
Full preterism keeps the action in the ancient world, then reads major categories across writings as one unified ancient interpretation of these urgent sayings. Idealism keeps the ethical urgency, but removes the specific historical crisis, treating the sayings as timeless spiritual truths.
Amillennialism keeps the tension of the sayings, but systematizes them into the ongoing life of the church.
Historic premillennialism direct the urgency toward a harmonized premillennial return,
while postmillennialism reframes the urgency into a mandate for gradual historical transformation.
Progressive dispensationalism balances the ancient urgency with a distant timeline structure.
And dispensational premillennialism repurposes the urgent sayings by splitting them into different administrative epochs for a distant timeline.
Historicism and Adventist historicism repurpose the sayings to calculate prolonged historical epochs.
And restorationist and high control systems repurpose the urgent language to generate constant modern crisis and boundary maintenance.
So the takeaway is that scholarship roots these urgent sayings in the ancient crisis of the original audience, while distant views distribute them across unrelated timelines.
Topic 6 is resurrection. The mainstream scholarly reading is that resurrection is a late developing concept of embodied vindication.
And this is because explicit resurrection belief emerges clearly only in late Second Temple Judaism.
Exactly. The historical anchor is the Second Temple Jewish crisis, where resurrection functioned to guarantee justice for the righteous.
Comparing the views from more aligned to more distant regarding resurrection, preterist-adjacent or context-first readings keep resurrection grounded in ancient Jewish and early Christian hopes for vindication.
Partial preterism stays close to the first-century context, then starts building a larger theological system across texts by retaining an ultimate physical resurrection.
Full preterism keeps the action in the ancient world, reads major categories across writings as one unified ancient interpretation, fundamentally altering the nature of resurrection. Idealism keeps the theme of life from death, but treats resurrection primarily as a spiritual or theological metaphor.
While amillennialism keeps a concrete resurrection, but embeds it deeply within traditional Augustinian frameworks.
Historic premillennialism reads resurrection through a sequenced premillennial event structure.
Postmillennialism places the physical resurrection at the end of a socially transformed era.
Progressive dispensationalism organizes resurrection into a phased sequence on a distant timeline.
And dispensational premillennialism repurposes resurrection into highly differentiated stages and raptures for a distant timeline.
Historicism and Adventist historicism repurpose resurrection events to align with specific dates in post-biblical history.
And restorationist and high control systems repurpose resurrection to apply exclusively to their specific remnant group.
So the takeaway is that scholarship analyzes resurrection as a plain, concrete, ancient hope, whereas distant systems turn it into a highly sequenced mechanical chart.
Topic 7 is final judgment and new creation. The mainstream scholarly reading is that final judgment and new creation represent ancient hopes for cosmic renewal and divine justice.
And this is because these concepts grew directly out of prophetic restoration language and Second Temple Jewish thought.
The literary function is to assure ancient communities of ultimate vindication and the renewal of the created order.
Comparing the views from more aligned to more distant regarding final judgment and new creation, preterist-adjacent or context-first readings keep the focus on the renewal language exactly as it functioned for the ancient audience.
Yeah, and partial preterism stays close to the first-century context, then starts building a larger theological system across texts by reserving final judgment and new creation for a later consummation.
Full preterism keeps the action in the ancient world, then reads major categories across writings as one unified ancient interpretation of complete renewal. Idealism keeps the concepts as ongoing spiritual realities rather than concrete events.
Amillennialism keeps the traditional theological synthesis of a final endpoint.
Historic premillennialism channels new creation through a literal millennial reign.
And postmillennialism views new creation as the culmination of historical and social kingdom growth.
Progressive dispensationalism softens categories but places the ultimate renewal on a distant timeline.
Dispensational premillennialism repurposes judgment and new creation into distinct administrative epochs for a distant timeline.
Historicism and Adventist historicism repurpose these themes to resolve specific historical conflicts spanning centuries.
And restorationist and high control systems repurpose final judgment to validate their modern existence and condemn outsiders.
The takeaway is that scholarship treats these themes as ancient expressions of cosmic justice, while distant frameworks lock them into rigid historical calendars.
Finally, topic 8 is harmonization, the interpretive practice of blending diverse texts written by different authors across different periods into one single, seamless timeline.
The mainstream scholarly reading is defined by low harmonization, preserving the internal diversity of the texts.
This is because historical critical scholars recognize that different authors addressed different ancient crises.
So the literary function of studying texts independently is to hear each author's distinct voice within their original horizon.
Comparing the views from more aligned to more distant regarding harmonization, preterist-adjacent or context-first readings keep harmonization low by prioritizing the individual ancient context of each document.
Partial preterism stays close to the first century context, then starts building a larger theological system across texts, increasing the level of harmonization.
Full preterism keeps the action in the ancient world, then reads major categories across writings as one unified ancient interpretation, resulting in extreme harmonization.
Which is a different kind of drift than futurist systems.
Right. Idealism keeps texts somewhat distinct, but harmonizes them thematically around spiritual principles.
Amillennialism harmonizes texts heavily, using established traditional and patristic theology.
Historic premillennialism harmonizes diverse passages to construct a unified premillennial sequence.
Postmillennialism harmonizes texts to support a unified narrative of ongoing historical victory.
Progressive dispensationalism utilizes significant harmonization to link ancient text to a distant timeline.
Dispensational premillennialism repurposes text entirely through aggressive harmonization, cutting and pasting verses from different eras to build a distant timeline.
Historicism and Adventist historicism repurpose and heavily harmonize symbols to fit a continuous post-biblical calendar.
And restorationist and high-control systems require absolute harmonization, repurposing all texts to strictly mandate their specific modern timeline.
The takeaway here is that scholarship respects the diverse voices of ancient authors, while systems moving away from scholarship increasingly flatten the text into a single rigid system.
To provide a final synthesis for you, preterist-adjacent readings remain the closest to the scholarly method. Partial preterism is next in alignment.
Full preterism follows after that, and futurist systems remain farther from the scholarly method.